So we're going to go through a kind of a sequence tonight, and the first part of it is just getting aware of our hands and arms and our bodies, which is what we normally do. The next thing we're going to do are some combinations of lines. So another really simple exercise, but don't be fooled. And we're just going to make two lines in any relation to the other. So make a line and then make another line in relationship to it. So little pairs of lines. So two things going on. One, that we should be aware of, again, how tight we're gripping the pencil, how our hand is moving, what the muscles in our hand feel like. Also, in our wrist, in our elbow, do we feel in our shoulder? Is it comfortable how we're sitting when we move this way? So all the body awareness that we can bring to it. The pressure that we're putting on the pencil. We're looking for all the signs of where any contraction is going on, or where there might be some tightness, or yeah, where the drawing we do in one direction might change the way we think about it. So that's going on. And the other thing we're going to look at with the two lines is our immediate reaction to the second line when we put it down, because we're starting to focus more and more now as we move away from the realistic drawing. We get a little bit more into the ideas of drawing, and we get a little bit more into just looking at what comes up when we draw, and we have making space for other things. We're not so concentrated, so there's time, a little bit time for insight. We're not so concentrated on an object. So here we're just making two lines. And yeah, when you see that line, how did you make the decision? That's really what it comes down to. How did that, and also when you see that second line, do you get this immediate reaction of like, dislike, or neutral? Could be quite neutral, but you might see one and think, oh, that's a Y, that's a T, are you labeling them? It's an L. Or are you, corner of a box, is that going on? Or are you looking at them and thinking something else about them? So that's what we want to notice with the two lines. They can cross. I generally draw it straight, but thinking about it, it could be a little curvy. There's no problem there if that's what's happening. Okay, now let's continue. Let's look through the lines you did and find one that maybe you had a favorable response to, that you felt like, oh, that's kind of neat looking, or whatever. It doesn't even have to be, and you could just choose it now if you didn't feel it then, but just pick one of the line combinations that you like. And then we want to repeat that now in a more regular fashion. So I'm going to take this one like that. And here I am. So I'm just in a line, and you can make them along a line, or you can make them along a group. You can do a second line. I'm going to stay with that one pair. Now we get more space. So let's take another breath. This is the type of drawing I was doing, and I'll show you later some of the drawings I made in 95, 96, 97, number of years. This was what drawing was in a large part for me. It's where I started to first feel the benefits of this sensory engagement as a way of quieting the mind, as a method of quieting the mind. And I thought I was on this great discovery. If you repeat this over and over again, it can be very soothing. It turns out that that loop in the mind that brings up thoughts and brings that voice up, sometimes called the default mode network, which is your mind always kind of in this default mode of talking to yourself, something like that, cycling words. It turns out that if two or more senses are engaged, the activity of that default mode network lowers, quiets down. So here certainly we're engaging the sense of touch, if you're at all aware of the pencil point or the pressure or the grip. And we're involving the sense of sight. So if you're looking at that shape, and if we place our attention on the senses, yeah, our awareness gets a little bit free. And that constant churning can kind of calm down. So we're building up a little bit of muscle memory. So it can get, yeah, it's very repetitive, but it can get a little bit lulling. So we also just kind of keep our mind on what we're doing, keep awake what we're doing. And one way to do that is to try to make the spacing even, or to try to make the one shape match the next, just so we have a little bit of awareness, and to keep ourselves on track. When I started to get that this kind of drawing was very soothing, one thing I saw was that it was very similar in some ways to the sound practice, which is the mantra practice. And I've looked into it a number of times and tried to find some real conclusive similarities. And I did look into it again this week, which was a lot of fun. I did a lot of reading and listening to mantra and looking at videos of mantra and all sorts of things. And one thing is that I have tremendous respect for mantra practice, even more now than I ever did. I'm also very humbled by the amount of scholarship and the amount of depth that practice has over, centuries. So I want to be clear, I'm not an expert on mantra practice, and I'm only speaking of it sort of as an observer of the practice, and I'm only really pointing out what I think are, observable parallels. I'm not trying to say that these are exactly equal, but the repetition of sound, it involves a physical aspect because you have this feeling of the reverberations in your chest and your throat and your mouth. And you have the auditory sense coming in. So you do have this kind of double or triple engagement of senses. And that is very similar to the drawing. And then I found some practices that were more in the Hindu practice, not necessarily in Buddhist practice, but in Hindu practice, there's a yantra practice, and they speak about it as visual mantra. So it's very interesting that there's more research and more material there to uncover about exactly the similarity. But a lot of those drawings are very constructed, and they're made to be observed while the mantra is going on. So that's like a third engagement, like a yantra will be made to be looked at, to engage the visual at the same time as the auditory, at the same time as the kinesthetic. So they were onto this sensory engagement as a way of quieting down the inner voice and allowing this flow to arise that we all know. So yeah, with this practice, we're engaged with the senses and we're engaged with the sensory response that we're getting. And this in some ways would be enough. In some ways, this practice can last a long time. The first one that we did with the 2 lines is a little more, engages the creative mind a little more, but this practice of 2 lines is like sitting with the breath. So I want to sit just about 2 minutes and just do this while I'm not chattering in your ear. So you can choose another shape, or you can work with the shape. And let's do about 2 minutes of this sort of visual mantra practice. Okay, that can go on and on for me. I'm going to get a new sheet of paper, and I'll show you this page. So it's like a couple of pages. That's the one I was working on this morning during the silent drawing. I filled up a whole page of different ones. So you can be a little more creative about the shapes you choose, or you can, or the way you repeat them. There's one where you repeat squares. This one I did with squares, and you try to make the squares the same size, sometimes overlapping, sometimes not. That's a lot of variations of it. Here you choose multiple lines. Here, squares in a grid. Different directions. These one look like parentheses. You can choose your shape. So anything, but the general principle is that you make a repetition and you have some condition like the shape of it or the distance of it that's going to keep you a little bit focused, and then you go over and over it in sets. And that's a nice quieting practice. And like I said, I did many years. I'll show you some examples of those. With some more creative aspects. Okay, so I'm going to, we're going to move now. So what you might have noticed during that exercise, yeah, I said it would quiet the mind, but maybe it wasn't quite as you thought it was going to be. Didn't really fulfill that quite as much because there was still some thoughts coming up, or maybe there was some emotions. But what can happen is when we get that default mode network quieted down, then all the other things in your mind that have something to say decide it's their turn. Like now that everyone's hanging out at home, all the animals kind of run down to the beach and out and fly around. And so in your mind, when that busy intersections all quiet down in your mind, sometimes a lot of things pop out. So the next exercise is to, yeah, we're going to start to talk about those things. Okay, now if you've done my classes or looked at the book, you know this one. It's one of my favorites, and it's a symbol of thought for me, and I call it the circle arrow. So I'll draw it really big here so everybody can see it. So we do, like in this Zen style tradition, we draw a circle, which is they call Enso. We draw a circle all the way around, which is good practice in itself. And then I add this little arrowhead at the end like that. I call that the circle arrow. Some people think it looks like an apple, which is also kind of interesting. It might, but for me, it's a circle with an arrowhead. Can touch or not touch, that's up to you. Okay, so what the practice is, just do the same thing we just did, except that you draw this instead. And you can do them in a grid, you can do them in a line, you can have them overlap, they can be all over the page, they can be big and small, there's no requirement. It's just that we could keep drawing this. And the reason I change here from just the 2-line symbol to the circle arrow is that we're going to move from just the immediate sensory responses, and we're going to use our minds a little more. We're going to use our thoughts a little more. And so as we go around the circle, we try to keep our concentration on the circle, try to keep our mind there, but inevitably, maybe not the first one, maybe not the second one, but eventually our mind's going to wander. And when we draw that arrow, we want to remind ourselves to bring our thoughts back. So this is a kind of a visual symbol of a meditation instruction where you sit and see what arises. And if you become distracted, you sort of gently bring your mind back to the center. Just bring your mind back. So we're moving around some cycle and we're bringing our minds back as we do it. And we're noticing if we become distracted. So one person that I was listening to this week, whose work I knew for quite a while, is a researcher in neuroscience and also in contemplative studies at Brown University, whose name is Willoughby Britton. And she's done talks at many conferences, and they actually have a center there at Brown for contemplative studies, and the neuroscience department is partially involved in it through her. And one thing that I when I first heard her speak years ago was that she said there are many everyday activities that will drop you into that state of quieted default mode network, that kind of quieted, meditative flow state you can get into. And she turned out to be a person that people would call when they dropped into it unknowingly, and they would call like a spiritual emergency. Like somehow they would have an insight in doing something, like chopping vegetables, or they would be folding things a lot, or they'd be packing things. They'd be doing something repetitive where they'd fall into the flow state, and then all of a sudden there would be some insight. And so she encountered a lot of these. Even soldiers, when they drill and they have to march left, right, they would fall into this state. So she talks about that. And so for me, very interesting that it can happen, not even when you're drawing, but in many, many states. She gives an example in one of her talks. She says, think of something about yourself that you don't like. And then she asks how many people in the audience thought of something, and basically everybody thought of something. And she said, well, notice how quickly you thought of something that you didn't like or would want to change about yourself. So what she said that meant was that was like a pathway in the brain that we were practicing. We were practicing somewhere, even though we weren't intentionally practicing. We were practicing building up that, neuroplastically building up that pathway. So when that critic comes up, it comes up quickly because we have this pathway built up. So when you calm down and when you get into the loop, you let these main pathways relax, hopefully, and you let other pathways get a chance to form. You get other nerves to get a chance to form. And if you're a little bit mindful about it, you can build new connections there. And so eventually with practice and with the right mindset, you can build up stronger connections that will reinforce the things that you like about the drawing. So you may actually even love the drawing that you're doing and end up criticizing it, not because even the drawing displeases you, but you're just, this pathway is so well developed that everything you see, you start to criticize. And so we criticize our drawing, we'll criticize other people, we'll criticize different opinions, that kind of thing. It's that repetition that gets the path built. There's another person we talk about sometimes in the group is Elizabeth Gilbert, and she also has some things to say about it. And she talked about mantra, and she said that when she's writing, or when she was writing her very famous book, Eat, Pray, Love, she kept hearing a voice, this sucks, this sucks. This was like some kind of mantra right in the back of her mind. And finally, she just had to say to that voice, look, I promised to be a writer, but I didn't promise to be a good writer. And managed to get it to go quiet. So yeah, what underlying mantras do you see repeating in your mind when you focus on your hand and your mark and it gets quiet and they get engaged? What comes up? What do you see? And then can you just go back to that joy in drawing? Can you let that quiet, and can you just go to what you really like? Like, it really feels good to move the pencil. It really feels good to take a little time and just doodle and just draw and just be open and just create. That really feels good. It's kind of like when you smile, when you put a smile on, even if you don't like feel happy, the muscles trigger nerves. And so if you smile enough, they say, you start to feel happy. Yeah. So if we focus on that joy when we're drawing, and we draw with that joy, then we can build up those neural pathways and we can really enjoy it. Yeah, and that critic won't have a thing to say. So let's give a couple minutes, just circle arrow, bringing ourselves back if we drift. Oh, time slipped away. I would say it was such a pleasure to for so many people at once, especially being on the hot seat here and like being able to relax in class. It's really amazing. Yeah, so I find for me that after a minute or two, yeah, kind of die down as I get into the repetition, and then maybe I start to get a little complacent, and then something comes up, larger train of thought takes me away, and So sometimes I change here from smaller to bigger. I change into a different style if I notice that, even not even just using the arrowhead, but really just kind of shifting. And it's really kind of fun to see that whole story melt away as you kind of shift out of it. So it's another tactic to keep. We just want to keep that awareness. We want to keep that awareness engaged. We want our attention on it. It's like riding the bike, as we talked about before. It's like our attention is on the pencil, our attention is on the mark, and our awareness sees it and keeps us mindful of it, and always wants to be tending to the physical. We want to be tending to the sensory. We want to be tending to these thoughts coming up, all sort of at the same time, just seeing what's going on in the mind, just noting what's going on. That's what our awareness is doing. Quiet, it'll get quieter and it'll get quieter over time. And that's a fun thing to see. Okay. I got one more. This one is when we get back to creativity finally. That's really one of my one I really enjoy. Okay, this one, if you know from the class, you know this one is called point to point. Okay, this couldn't be simpler. Couldn't be simpler. You make a point on your page, you make another point on your page. Okay, 2 points. You can draw them or you can imagine them, but we start with 2 points. Okay, and the exercise is that we connect those points. So there, I connected them that time. Straight line, it was the easy one to start with. Okay, the next time you connect them differently. So, and try not to repeat. So then like this one, maybe I'll connect them like that. Okay, this time, maybe I'll connect them like this. Now, next week, I'm going to talk about algorithmic systematic art. not in a heavy technical way, but just to show you experiments and how machines can be creative and how it changes how we're creative. But one thing I learned when I was writing software to make drawing tools for computers was that I needed to come up with some sort of general rule for how many ways you could connect points. So I started to draw them out, all the different ways that you could connect 2 points. And as you might guess, there were more differences than I could draw, at least in a long time, a couple of days or a year. Anyway, so we're going to draw between the 2 points anything, any way. So here we're still with our attention on the pencil and the grip and the speed and the pressure. Still on the sensory input that's coming in. Do we like, dislike, or are we neutral on what's appearing? Still with our awareness on the story we're telling or any thoughts that we're having, just seeing them come up and just gently letting them kind of go away. So let's do that for a minute or so. Let's draw point to point. So take your time. This one can actually be a little fatiguing. We've been drawing for a while, even though we're warmed up, but all of a sudden, well, there's no pressure to come up with anything, but all of a sudden, maybe there's a little what's this next one going to be? But see if you can just allow your hand to do whatever. Instead of sort of thinking about what should happen between the 2 points, just let your hand move and see what it'll do. And if it does happen to do exactly the same thing, yeah, just go back and put a couple little marks on it there. It can make it different. But I don't think it will, but it could. Even just changing, if you do another straight line and you just change the pressure, it'll be a little bit different. And in fact, could it really be the same? So very relaxed, just letting that line go between the 2 points and show us whatever it wants to show.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does it have to be continuous line?
Continuous between the 2 points?
Yeah.
No, it could be gaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
Gaps
can
are,
be?
yes, can be. Yes.
Okay.
Spaces are okay, gaps, jumps, all good. You can go anti 2 points even, but as long as you're watching it, it's good. As long as the 2 points are somehow involved. Yeah, so good breath, good deep breath. Just let it flow. Just try to get in there and let them go. I mean, it may be a little tentative, like, can I really let it go? Do I really need to think it up? But just do, trust it. Okay, and now while it's going, we're gonna go back in for a couple minutes and practice it. And while we're practicing, I wanna add one more layer, first little bit of insight. And that is, while it's going, if you can get into that state, or even not, but just while you're watching that line emerge, try to catch a glimpse. If you're really relaxed and you're looking kind of back toward that decision-making process that's moving your hand, that energy that's coming from somewhere that's moving your hand in that way, just try to get a look at that. Just try to get a look at where's the source of that. Like, who or what is back there deciding that? Somehow that got decided. How did that? I see my hand making these marks. Why did it come out that way? What or who decided it should be that way? So let's practice that a little bit. Okay, so there's one more turn on the road as we're doing point to point. We're drawing point to point, and we're letting, as best we can, the pencil take its own path out on a walk. We're watching that develop. We're noticing if we have judgment about it. We're noticing if it brings up any thoughts, questioning what we're doing, or happy with what we're doing, or amazed at what's happening. That's where we're going to make the little turn. As we're looking back at that source, we're looking back to try and get a glimpse of where those decisions are coming from, where that set of muscle twitches is being directed by. We're not going to try to nail it down. We're not going to say that it's this or that, or it's our mind, or it's a set of conditions. We're not going to worry about that. We're just going to look at how amazing it is that it can happen. And we look at all these lines. You can glance back at all the previous ones. You can look at the ones you're making. And just as it's coming out, let's just sit for a minute or two on that, just on that brilliance, on that amazing capacity. Not only to manipulate the pencil in these kind of fine ways and quite varied ways, but to, be able to see and recognize it, be able to process it into an image, to be able to form any thought at all about it, and then just to be able to be here with that as it's happening.
Oh,
Amazing time we can be together and practicing, and watching all these drawings emerge. So I'm going to bring up some, like I said in the beginning, I'll bring up some of the little systematic drawings that I did. This is from 1998. These pieces of paper are, they're like about that big. And you can see this one in particular starts off really, these are like little point to points. And they get more complicated and more complicated. Just as I get more and more into the flow, I let them get more and more complicated, and until like they're not even lines between points, they're little structures, and on like that. And this one was a particular point to point one. You can see there's some. This wasn't, I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to make a drawing like this and go through with all this complexity. This was really just letting it emerge. And then sitting in the wonder of like, where did this come from? And the complexity just came as natural as possible. But not trying to make it complex, and yet just being involved in the marks and saying, what should go next? What should go next? And allowing that decision-making process just to proceed. And I think I've shown some of these on Instagram, but I'm going to turn on my camera on this one. Okay, if you look at that, so there's just stacks of these. I'm showing them on my other camera. There we go, just stacks and stacks of them. That was a daily practice for sure. So Yeah, systematic drawing is quite different approach. It's really letting loose more about the physicality and also getting a little bit more into the creative source, which is where we'll go even further next time. So there's a minute or two. I'm interested in anyone's response to any of the practices and what was coming up and anything they might have struggled with in any of the meditations.
I had an interesting moment just now with the point to point. I got frustrated because it was not organized and it was just kind of ugly. And I realized that that's exactly the type of voice that you were talking about in the meditations. And so it was like a cool, like bringing everything together. So.
Yay! And what did you do with it? Just noticed?
I just, told it to shut up, and
Yeah.
I kept going. It's something that I've been working with in other aspects of my life, but I hadn't even thought to like bring that that type of thinking into my drawing, the like mindfulness stuff. So
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate that. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same way. I really started to relax and enjoy doing the repetition, you know, and then doing this point to point, my critical brain just went right in there and was like, okay, well, what's next? Is it going to be different or more creative or what's it going to, really just, but I just pushed through it and decided just do whatever, try to listen to John and just persevere, but very critical. I mean, oh, yeah.
So that's funny because
Sorry, you're muted now. I think maybe you have an echo and okay, we'll get your comments later.
I had this moment where, so some of the work that I do is really just highly structured and kind of technical and not all that creative. And like, what if I did this for like 2 minutes before going into like an hour or two of like just having to do this sort of more technical work? Would I actually kind of get more into the flow of what I was doing if I kind of released the creative brain first?
That's amazing. Yeah, I'd love to hear the report.
Yeah, well, I'll try it this week. We'll see.
Also, maybe you'll be able to see that work, yeah, from a little more of that perspective of just watching it go by, as opposed to,
Yeah.
being attached or identified with it. Like it must be this way somehow. That could be interesting.
I just want to say, I think this is why this, to me, I think is so fun, because the amount of judgment that comes up, like I've been making art for like literally my entire life, and still the amount of like commentary and judgment that happens around it is just, it's like, it's ridiculous. It's so big. But the fact that you can practice seeing that while you're drawing, and then because you realize, oh, this same voice that is commentating like constantly is why I'm having trouble like everywhere. So I love that as this practice. So it's fun that people like, because you realize like the one Julian was saying, like that this is where I'm having trouble, like in other areas, right? It's that same, like that judging voice. So I love that, of using this place to see and start to let go of that. That's awesome.
I felt more comfortable drawing the circles instead of straight lines. I felt the straight lines were very restricting, where the circle was more of a freeing, more relaxing. I felt more restricted when I was drawing straight lines.
Yeah, that's great to note. And I was going to say something also when Juliet was saying, if you find that you're tight in one area, yeah, you can drop to another part of that practice. Yeah, if the criticism is too much, go to a completely uncritical, like a circle or a line. Yeah, or if you're worried too much about the lines being not right, yeah, find the one that works. Yeah, where you find that quietness. That's where you want to go. And then you see if you can move to the others, if you get a little flow in that. Okay, we're close to the end. So there's drawing bees on Tuesdays. There's a daily silent practice if you want to come do some point-to-point lines in the morning at 11 Eastern. We go 11 to 12 in silence for a group practice. And I'm around also if you want to let me know what you're up to or chat about your practice. Just drop me a note or meet me at one of the drawing bees. And I think people will hang out. Some people have been hanging out at 9 o'clock. So I think we'll hang out for a while after more casual chat. But other than that, I really want to say again how much I appreciate you being here. It's really a great pleasure to prepare for material and to study these things and to be able to present them. So thank you for doing the practice, and hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Bye. Very enjoyable.
This is
Thank you.
This was fun, John. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. John, did you say you had shared some of those on your Instagram?
Yeah, way back in the early Instagram, if you scroll way back.
What's your Instagram handle?
Oh, it's Drawing Your Own Path.
Oh my gosh. This is how I found your the thing. I don't It's been
Yeah.
that kind of day.
You know what? In the next couple days, I'll put up some more for you guys, and just to refresh the feed. So yeah, I'll show some of the crazier points. This is a really crazy one.
I really like that they changed completely. That you can see total transformation in what they suggest. That's how they came to me. Like a group would suggest some things, like some of the Plains Indians drawings, and then some of them got very Asian for me, and it just I just like that. It made me excited about if I continue doing it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and also just to be able to notice that you're processing it that way, that you're calling up imagery from, and you have a cultural association, or you have a historical or personal experience somewhere where you first saw that. There's a lot. We're going to go more and more back into that when we get to reading the drawings. We're going to get really into where those are coming up, where those thoughts are coming from. And
Yeah, to me it looked like language, like letters, some hieroglyphic.
yeah, it often does. Yeah, that's true.
Like,
But you're developing your own visual language as you do it. And what happens now is I do essentially these, but I do them improvisational style. I don't do the point to point, but sometimes I do, but I do essentially improvisational drawing. And then the bigger works, all my bigger works come from just what language develops in that practice. So as I draw every day, it develops a language, as you're suggesting, and then that becomes the visual language of like all the work. That's where it arises from, as opposed to saying I'm going to comment on this thing that was in the news, or I'm going to comment on this thing that happened to me. Instead of making a conscious decision about what the work should be about, I allow the work itself to have create the voice. And that's the basis of practice, is you got to get good and practiced at just allowing it to arise. And part of that is the hand, but also, as we saw, part of it is the mind, just trying to keep ourselves quiet enough not to interfere with what's coming up. And there's a lot of trust in it as well, to say, like, if I just draw anything, it won't be any good. I said that today. I have a big sheet of paper on the table over here, 22 by 30 sheet of paper here, and I didn't start it because I was afraid that it wouldn't be any good. So, and I said,
Oh.
how could you do that? But tomorrow I will overcome it and start.
Okay.